On a lonely, dusty platform, on the outskirts of the grand city of Raxus, a small little boy watched as his father boarded the warship Hammerhead, headed to fight the Curdans in the war in the eastern regions. Little Jason Rhodes watched the Hammerhead's engine spew out steam and smoke as it prepared to depart. On the edge of this platform of steel, Jason could see far out into the wastelands that separated the edge of the border between Curdun and the Empire. Jason ran to his father, just as the great warship was about to set off. Jason's father, Arthur Rhodes, looked back and smiled grimly. "I'm afraid you can't come with me, Jason. I've told you this before," he said. "I'll be home before you know it. Uncle Jack will take care of you." Jason nodded and turned to leave slowly, but his father called for him to stop. "Wait," his father said. "Take this." Arthur Rhodes handed his son a key. "Keep this safe," he said. "I trust you with this." He ruffled Jason's hair and then stepped back onto the Hammerhead. Its engine roared as Jason's hair, dark, messy, was blown back by the dark black gas that spewed out of the exhausts. The airship rose up, then chugged on slowly towards into the distance, and then disappeared behind a cloud of black smoke. Alone, Jason walked along the old mossy bridge that led him home. Behind him, in the distance, black skies filled with industrial smog loomed overhead. It seemed to Jason that the sky was getting blacker every day. He concluded that it was definitely darker than it was 10 years ago. As he reached the end of the bridge, he arrived at the beginning of a long stretch of narrow streets and alleys. The Curdun district contained all manner of small, impoverished, and sad dwellings that were in every nook and cranny of the district's few houses. Jason hated passing through the Curdun district, mainly because of their history. The Curdans that were here clearly stood out with their ornate scarves and accents. They refused to give up their cultures when they were defeated in the Great War. Jason looked at them vindictively. Every time he looked at them, they reminded him of his father. "Serves them right," Jason said to himself. "They started the whole bloody war in the first place." Jason had hated how Uncle Jack had forced him onto the path of becoming an engineer. Even though he was pretty good at fixing things, Jason despised the dark, smoky factories which the constant drone of the heavy machinery always was omnipresent. He really didn't want to be part of the Imperial Engineers Guild, meaning he had to spend all his days working in these conditions. But in the end, really, what choice did he have? Since Uncle Jack's death, Jason was on his own, and he didn't really have much of a choice. Finally, after navigating through the packed streets and brushing past aggressive street vendors, he reached his home, a broken-down 5-story house that housed over 24 residents. It was one of the oldest of its kinds, which means there's no bloody elevator, Jason said to himself sourly. Very tired and annoyed, he climbed the 10 stories of stairs to his floor. After reaching the top floor, he yanked the door open to his room. Inside, various garments and tools lay around haphazardly. A desk and bed next to the window, overlooking the street below, revealed a gloomy sight of everyday life. From an airship, the whole residential area looked like a giant maze. As a result, the best view from his window was the next block over. Jason was exhausted from working all day in the factories, collapsed onto his bed. In dreams, Jack remembered living with Uncle Jack, who had grown more and more annoyed of caring for him. Jason knew it was only a matter of time before he would be kicked out for good. But then Uncle Jack caught the creeping flare, and since he was going to die, left his home to Jason, and Jason never forgot the vengeful last words he said. "You're a lucky devil." Jason woke up and stretched his arms as he got out of bed. "Time for another day at the factories," he said to himself, "and more bloody stairs." Packing his bag with his goggles and tools for the day, he turned to open the door, his groggy mind still out of focus from waking up. Suddenly he realized there was a box on the floor underneath his door. What in the devil, he thought. How did that even get in here? Curious, he looked at it by pacing around it, and then he noticed that there was a lock on the box, and the words, Lieutenant Rhodes, written on it, in golden font. As he read it, he shook his head to focus. Lieutenant Rhodes? That was his father. Wait, there was the key. The one he had given so many years ago by Arthur Rhodes, his father. Yes, heart pounding. Jason took the key from its place around his neck and stared at it. Then, with a shaking hand, unlocked the box. Inside, Jason stared at a single slip of paper inside it. Curiosity pulsing through his nerves, he picked it up and read it. Jason Rhodes, it read. I know this sounds crazy, and you probably won't believe me, but I know what happened to your father. Meet me in the industrial sector on Fleming Street, though I would recommend coming armed. Be careful. A friend. Jason froze, folding the letter. It had been 10 years since he'd seen his father, Arthur Rhodes, and he was really unsure what to do about this. He was not one to just go blindly into a situation without knowing anything. He was often very pessimistic about these sorts of things. Looking at the letter again, he couldn't help but wonder. Who was this friend, and why did it say to come armed? Jason didn't really have any real friends, apart from the engineer team, which he could hardly ever speak to during his work, because of all the violent machinery. After a long pause, Jason laughed. Nice try, friend, he thought. You won't be tricking me today. Crumpling the letter up and throwing it out of the window. But something told him to be safe that day. He opened up the old drawer that Uncle Jack had kept locked for so long, and smashed it open. He felt a twinge of uneasiness as he held Uncle Jack's old revolver. No, he thought, it won't come to that. Loading 6 shots in it, he shoved it in with the rest of his things into his bag. Here goes nothing, he muttered to himself. 3 hours later, Jason disembarked the transport airship at the end of the ride and proceeded to walk down the smog-filled streets of the Fleming Industrial District. The sounds of machines straining to do the heavy work set out for them was omnipresent. Airships were all over the skies, lazily chugging across to different cities like Streels or to the capital. It had been a long time since the war with the Curtain had ended. Jason never really knew much about the Curtains, but from what other children and adults told him, and the fact that they took his father away from him, was enough for him to share everyone's view about them. Breaking out of thought, Jason barely noticed 2 darkly clothed figures that seemed to be watching him through the busy streets. That's a strange place to stand, Jason thought to himself, before pushing past a man in a great top hat. After turning a few corners and passing a woman with a soot-covered face and goggles masking her eyes, he saw them again. When this happened a third time, paranoia flooded over, and Jason started to get the feeling this wasn't a coincidence. He was being followed. Jason felt the revolver in his bag. It was still there. Jason Rhodes was getting a little unnerved at this rate, and ducked into one side of the alley, where he knew they couldn't follow him without purposely going there too. Plus, Jason still wasn't 100% sure they were following him. If they were following him, this would prove it.